So in today's video, we're going to dip our toes, maybe even up to our knees, into some awesome North American rewilding projects. A place home to quite possibly one of the most iconic rewilding projects. And some of its ecosystems are at a point where if interventions were made, we could see some rapid changes. And this is very exciting for an incredibly vast continent that is full of opportunities to rewild across a multitude of habitats and systems. And as well as being really good for nature, we'll learn that once again, community is at the heart of these rewilding projects. Before we get into it, please drop a comment down below, let me know what rewilding videos you want to see coming up, or you can leave your thoughts and opinions, any feedback, or you can just say hi, just drop a comment, it really helps the YouTube algorithm. For our first project, we're looking at efforts to create the largest nature reserve in the United States, the American Prairie Reserve. When it's complete, it will consist of around 3.2 million acres of grasslands. Think of the Serengeti or the Savannah, but this is in Northern America. So the American Prairie Reserve is a non-profit located in Montana that has been purchasing grasslands and sticking them together to create a fully intact grassland habitat. And temperate grasslands like these found in Montana are the least protected biome on Earth, so rewilding them is all the more important. But what makes this project really stand out is its timescale, its ecological timescale, and the condition it finds itself in. Not even 100 or 200 years ago, these landscapes would have been inhabited by big wild animals, very similar to what we see upon the biodiversity wild grasslands of Africa today. But the thing is that these natural processes, these animals were removed very fast from these American landscapes. It's animals like the bison, the deer, elk, mountain lions, coyotes, and of course the funny little prairie dog. I just love the way they pop out the ground. These animals have been more and more marginalised by human activities, and their populations have drastically depleted. But it's these animals, like the bisons, that were once in herds of tens of millions that work to maintain the grasslands. And it's these animals and their interactions which are once again so integral to the rewilding of the American prairies. It's something which they call the American Prairie Model, which at its core is all about purchasing land which is adjacent to land which they already own. So this ties them together, and it means that even small patches of land that are purchased and rewilded, in the context of the wider landscape, they have great significance. And since 2005, 300 bison have been reintroduced to the Montana prairie, with new calves being born each spring since 2006. Year upon year, the bison herd is growing, which means they require more and more land as the current lands reach carrying capacity. This means constant work to expand territories, remove interior fences, and erect wildlife-friendly fences to the edges of the reserve. And other works include restoring the ploughed lands to grasslands, improving soils by planting specific seed mixes to rejuvenate the soils, and welcoming grazing animals in as little as 7 years. And of course, like any solid rewilding project, the people and the local community are at its heart. Since 2002, the American Prairie Reserve has contributed $39 million to the local community's economy. But most importantly, for the people, the American Prairie represents an idea, a scene of wilderness that we've only known through media, through books, through portrayals. Thanks to these rewilding efforts, the Wild West feel is coming back, and through a multitude of different ecotourism ventures, people can come and experience this slice of wilderness. So for our next project, we moved to the Northeast, where I was introduced to a lovely phrase, forever wild. I'm pretty sure that should be on a t-shirt. But it's the Northeast Wilderness Trust that commits every single project and every element of the work they do to the notion of forever wild. But what does this mean, and what are they trying to keep forever wild? The Trust works to protect and ensure the future of old growth forests. Old growth means trees that have been around for 150 years while growing amongst a diversity of other trees, ensuring structural diversity and with significant amounts of deadwood. This is key. Both standing and fallen gap formation, where older trees are either snapped in half by strong winds or where they've wind-blown and felled at the roots, allowing light through, stimulating growth to the understory. Then you have the undulating topography, where these trees have fallen decades, sometimes even centuries ago, and their long decayed trunks have just formed this mound in the forest floor. Like, you wouldn't want to go running fast through these forests unless you had to, unless you're being chased by like a bear or a wolf or something. But the idea of something being forever wild, that is how you get old growth forests. Throughout the states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York and Vermont, a combined total of 64,518 acres are protected, are being rewilded. So the approach to rewilding old-growth forests is a little bit different to say what we saw in the first projects like the prairies, because any old-growth forest that is still standing today is immensely valuable, and no matter how small, it has to be protected. And it's valuable simply because of the time it takes to get to that status. And the interesting thing to remember with the Northeast is that although that many of these locations aren't necessarily abundant with these big animals like the lynx, the bobcat, wolves, these animals can and do naturally disperse into these areas. And in case you wondered, old-growth forest is just about the most perfect habitat for these creatures. So it was fascinating to learn of how mother bears and their female offspring will return to the same location of big trees year on year to nurse their young, and of how bobcats will favour the root plates of windblown trees to scent mark. They rub their faces all over it, sometimes they directly spray right on it, and of how a fallen tree just decays into rich soils, which then becomes an opportunity for new trees to grow out from. This rewilding project just brought home the message that nature knows what to do. All we have to do is facilitate it, do our best to not get involved, and make sure that when we do not exploit it, and we're respectful. We remember that we are the guests. We don't own it. So our third project is one that you likely know well, or you've at least heard of how a reintroduction of a single species was able to ignite an entire ecosystem. So much so that it did indeed change the course and the flow of rivers. Now, we're not talking about an introduction of a fish, although they did subsequently benefit from this reintroduction. We are, of course, talking about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone. So it's believed that the wolves went extinct in Yellowstone around the early 1900s. And their decline was due to hunting, predator control programs. And as the wolf's presence receded, so did Yellowstone's vibrance. Most notably due to the ever-rising, ever-grazing population of wild deer, elk, herbivores that were just mindlessly grazing away at the fringe areas, at the edge of woodlands, in the riparian zones, on the edges of the mountains. I know this isn't a mountain, the closest thing we have to a mountain around here. But they were grazing so heavily that the forest couldn't naturally regenerate. And at Yellowstone, trees are an integral part of the ecosystem. So during the 1990s, scientists wanted to put their theory into action. An idea that large predators, apex predators, the ones who sit at the very top of the food chain, an idea that these animals play an integral role in regulating the rest of the ecosystem. And so, in January 1995, 14 wolves from multiple packs were translocated from Alberta, Canada, and reintroduced to Yellowstone. The effect that they have upon the ecosystem is what's known as a trophic cascade. It's a top-down effect that influences all of the stages of the food chain as part of like a chain reaction. And specifically, it's known as the ecology of fear. And because of this fear, the wolves influence the movement patterns of the deer. They would no longer mindlessly graze patches until they were bare. And this constant movement allowed for the vegetation to recover, for trees to grow in the areas they previously couldn't. And once the tree is grown, the pillars of life, this is where you get the insects moving in, the birds and other keystone species, such as the beaver, who engineer even more biodiverse landscapes. And the trees, they grew upon mountainsides, they grew upon the banks of the rivers, and they stabilized the soils, and it changed the course of these rivers. But the really awesome thing is that we saw these changes happen in a relatively short space of time, just 20 to 25 years, which is a very short amount of time, and it makes you ask the question, why? Why did this happen at Yellowstone? Well, Yellowstone was ready for wolves. It hadn't really been 100 years since their presence was felt. The environment and the conditions were perfect. Basically uninhabited by people, 100% suitable habitat everywhere, and of course, an abundance of prey. And all of these ingredients enabled the wolves to come in as a keystone species and really take the landscape to the next level. Could a wolf reintroduction have the same impact to other countries, to other parts of the world, say Britain? Well, that's a video that I'm going to be making very soon. So we now visit a region that's known as a biodiversity hotspot. There's only 36 of them across the globe, and it means that they contain a high number of endemic species. It's home to bobcats, it's home to mountain lions, coyotes, as well as over 35 different amphibians and reptiles, and nearly 400 different species of bird. We are talking about the Santa Monica Mountains in California. And wildfires in California have long been a part of the ecosystem, but in recent years, they've been getting much bigger and much stronger. The 2018 Woolsey fire was particularly devastating, burning more of the Santa Monica Mountains than any other fire in recorded history. People lost their homes and many their lives. The landscape was destroyed. Now this rewilding project feels a little bit different from most because most of them are seeking to undo the harm and the exploitation of man over decades, over centuries. But this one is seeking to restore a habitat after a natural disaster, a very rapid event. And it's the National Park Reserve and members of the community that are coming together to rewild these lands. They recognise that yes, these lands would eventually recover, but it would take decades. And this is their home. Their home has been destroyed, along with a lot of the life that goes with it. The core efforts have been focused on planting native species, quite often taking seeds from nearby plants on site and reconnecting the landscape. It just makes you realise more and more that people and community are at the heart of restoring nature. So this next one is less of a project, more of an inspiring and heartwarming story of how a Scotsman walked across Canada in his kilt to raise money to rewild his homeland. Michael Yellowlees and his husky Luna set off from Tofino in British Columbia before embarking on a 9-month, 8,000 kilometre journey across Canada. And Michael raised over £40,000 for the charity Trees for Life. And come rain or shine, he wore the kilt. And why Canada? I guess because Canada represents wilderness, intact wilderness. And I think he just wanted to bring attention to that and bring it home back to Scotland, which could become the world's first rewilding nation, which you can watch and find out all about in this video that's on the screen now. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Leave curious. Oh, God, my leg.